Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Welcome to Season 4, my friends, of the Pilates Lounge podcast. This is a space for movement lovers, Pilates educators, and Pilates professionals who want to think a little bit deeper about the work we do. My name's Katie Crane. I've been teaching Pilates for over 20 years, and along the way, I've worn many hats. Studio owner, teacher trainer, mentor, and lifelong student of the work we do. I'm also a surfer, an adventurer, a mum, a busy wife, and someone who believes that movement is by far more than exercise. On this podcast, we talk about Pilates as a practice, not just what we do on the mat or on the equipment, but how Pilates shapes the way we move, teach, lead, and live our lives. We explore anatomy, health, business, culture, and the evolving identity of Pilates in the modern world. This is a place for honest conversations, lived experience, and perspectives that respect both the lineage of Pilates and the people practicing it today. So thank you so much for being here. Let's dive into the episode. Hi everyone, my name's Katie Crane from the Pilates Lounge podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge. This round we are touching on the topic of fibromyalgia. A lot of us work with people who live with fibromyalgia or some of the other chronic conditions that affect how people live their lives. So today I wanted to bring on a guest who is not only living with fibro, but she shares her story in a way that helps other people live with chronic conditions. So welcome to the show, Reanne. I would love for you to literally introduce yourself to our beautiful audience today and just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Reanne. I'm a mother of two living in the UK. So my sort of journey with fibromyalgia has been an extensive one, the majority of my life, basically. But I only sort of discovered when I was diagnosed in 2021 just how much it had really impacted on my life. When I was diagnosed, what I couldn't fathom out is why all of a sudden I'd been completely floored with the illness, to the point where I would have to force myself out of bed in the mornings, try and muster up that courage to get the kids to school, go back home and then dive straight back into bed and spend, hours and hours and hours just resting, because my body that's what it needed. So yeah, like I say, when I was diagnosed, I just couldn't fathom why all of a sudden, when I'd lived my whole life in pain of some sort, why it had automatically floored me. Up until that point, I was successful from the outside world. I'd got a small business, got a home, built a life around this having chronic pain condition, but I hadn't really noticed it up until 2021 when life, it just took over. And then what I really discovered then was I started to do my own research because my brain couldn't fathom out how I'd live with all this pain. It completely floored me. So I was like, there's got to be a reason. So I sort of started doing my own research and I dug myself a hole. And that, but it's been fascinating. It's been eye-opening. It really has been. And hence why I use the modalities now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell me, like you say that you pretty much have lived a life of knowing that something's not right, like before children as well. Like like where were you before your body changed? Or do you remember, was there a time when you weren't feeling any of this?
When I originally started to look back, I was like backtracking and I could date pain symptoms as early as being a young child. My mum always said I was always a bit anemic, but never on the down the blood test route, doctors could never pinpoint anything. Um, I was always the drama queen, it's not that bad sort of thing, oh, it's just growing pains and things like that. So when I backtracked, I could date it back as early as being a young child. But initially, growing up, it was just part of everyday life.
And what does that look like to you? What does that everyday life look like? Like you'd have symptoms of potential anemia, being a bit of a drama queen, but what does that feel like inside your body?
Oh, you might get me a bit emotional now. So it's being the outsider a lot of the time, the outsider looking in, trying to fathom out why everybody else seems happy in an occasion and you feel like the odd one out, the ugly duckling almost, why am I not, why do I not feel like I'm experiencing this like other people are? And that then impacts on how you see yourself, going down that whole route of not being good enough, not feeling seen, not feeling heard. So when I received my diagnosis, it was like sort of the catalyst for change almost, because it gave me validation. So the
Mm,
the label, the term in itself gave me validation. It meant that what was happening wasn't just happening in my brain. There was a reason for it. So that, yeah, that was the
mhm.
best part.
And when you say that there's that sense of being on the outside looking in, like you're not experiencing what everybody else is experiencing, what's stopping you from experience that? Is it the emotional part of your body, or is it that you don't feel that you're physically able to experience what everybody else is experiencing?
I think it's both because of how your body is physically responding. Emotionally, it impacts that as well. So they
Mm,
sort of they definitely go hand in hand, the emotional side and the physicality. Because a
mhm,
body crying out
mhm.
in pain,
Yeah.
you're completely absorbed in it. All your attention and your focus is completely removed because you're carrying this like heavy coated weight almost, and it's dragging you down.
Mm, mhm. How old were you when you got diagnosed?
I was 33 when I was diagnosed.
Wow, but you've lived with what you knew to be like, you've lived with this something that made you feel like you didn't belong, like made you feel like you're an outsider. And I could imagine it's not, you can't see fibro. It's not like you've missing an arm or missing a leg. So from people around you who are not experiencing these things, then it's very hard for them to understand where you're coming from anyway. Hey, so it's almost like a double-edged sword of you missing out because you don't feel capable, but then nobody understanding because it doesn't look like you got anything.
Hmm. And that's the hardest part of living with an invisible illness of any kind, um, is that people don't understand because they can't feel the way that you feel.
And so, were you diagnosed by a rheumatologist, or what did your journey towards diagnosis look like?
Well, it was around the time of COVID, that time when the world stopped, and it was definitely the increased pressure. I can now look back and say that the increased pressure of the constant news feeds, the negativity, the conversations, world, the life as we knew it just completely stopped, and that definitely had an impact. So around, actually, no, it must have been pre-COVID. It was pre-COVID because I actually found my diagnosis letter the other day, which was April 2021. So it was pre-COVID. That time definitely had an impact on the
Yeah,
symptoms.
like COVID was 20, wasn't it? 1920? 90, yeah,
Oh, was it
yeah,
20?
yeah. I mean, 1920,
It
2020. I
seems
think
like
it
a
was
lifetime.
2020.
It's a lifetime ago now, it seems, doesn't it? Go, it's crazy. But
Yeah,
around those sort of time period anyway, I was massively having, I mean, I've had them on and off a lot of the time, but massively having like heart palpitations. Um, as I say, I was virtually in bed a lot of the time. I just physically couldn't move. And yeah, it was hard. Sorry, I forgot what your original question was. Can you just
Oh, no,
repeat
that's okay.
that?
That's all right. Yeah. So, what did your who diagnosed you? Was it a rheumatologist or was
Oh,
it somebody else? And what did that journey look like?
yeah, so it was a rheumatologist. So basically, they did a backtrack of like my whole medical records, and you could clearly see, all the times that I'd been into hospital to complain of. I've been hooked up to an ECG machine. I'd had scans on my stomach and scans on my bowel, on my womb. All these different things. Um, for me, pain in my legs was particularly bad. So when I so yeah, it got to the point where I could be standing and literally my legs would give way from beneath me, and I'd have to like steady myself. And looking back, it was the time when, because historically I'd worked with children, and I remember at one point carrying a small child and my legs completely giving away. Now I managed to just like hold them so that they were safe, but triggered in me that I can't go on like this. Like, this is not my life.
Mm,
And when I think back to those times, I get emotional because it was hard. It was hard.
mm, mhm, mhm,
So, yeah, it was a rheumatologist. I remember being sat in the room, and they're asking me about all these different things. And he mentioned just one thing. Have you had any major events happen in your life? And there was one event that just came, it was back here, and then it all automatically came to the front, and I broke down in tears. And he said, yeah, it's, looking at your medical history, seeing your reaction to that question, he's like, that is fibromyalgia. And that's what it's explained in my letter as well, is like all the links that have been put together to actually see that diagnosis. Because again, there was no sign, there was nothing showing up on scans, nothing showing on blood tests, nothing. So this is how they make the links, and that's how they put it all piece. It's like a jigsaw puzzle.
mm, mm, mhm. And reflecting on that moment, like if that experience where you brought from the back of your head and it was right there at the front, was that a moment of relief to realize that there was a connection with that event, or did it bring back trauma, or what's that experience?
At the time, those emotions are heavy. You're uncovering things that you thought you'd put long to bed. At the time, they're heavy, but once, and this is the beautiful part of the space that I hold, the work that I do now. Once you're in it, it feels hard, but once you've sat with it and you've worked through that process, um, and reframed it, you come out of it a completely different person. Like, I wouldn't have been able to sit here and talk about it with you now without breaking down into tears at just sheer the mention of it. But now I can. So, which is how I know that things have changed. And I've been to lots of different places, even small childhood hurts. I remember I've been back to a space where I remember being stood up in front of a class and presenting a project and being humiliated by the class's response. And just that feeling of humiliation, I'd kept it buried, in that trauma loop. And it was impacting me in some sort of way. So once I revisited those moments and reframed them, life is totally different now. So yeah, it's all
Mm,
worth it. So
mhm.
in that moment, it's hard.
Right. And so, do you share that past trauma with people, or are you happy to share that past trauma with people?
I share. Some might say that I'm an oversharer. So yeah, I do. I do. I do share a lot of the stories, and I share one particular story with you. So I come from, a family who, from the outside world, looked picture perfect. mum, dad, both working, like house, two kids, car. You know, we had everything, but the relationship between my mum and my dad wasn't always great. So much so that they divorced when I was about 16. And growing up in that environment where parents are, bickering with each other a lot, and their comments are passed. And have you ever been in a situation where you walk into a room and you could literally take a knife to the atmosphere, and because it's that tense? So yeah, a lot of that. And sometimes, my dad wasn't always able to control his own anger. So yeah, tense environments. So there's a lot of times where you get in that freeze mode, because so the body's having a response to the environment. Particularly the pain in my legs was a massive trauma. It's had a massive impact. And that's probably why it was so severe, is in that those moments that I'd revisited, particularly one where my dad had attempted suicide, when after my mum had said that they were divorcing. And I remember walking out onto the hallway in the middle of the night as a teenager. This was, and witnessing, witnessing that. Now, you talk about that event to him, and he has a completely different recollection, almost a non-recollection, of that event happening. But me and my mom have a completely different experience of that event. So trauma is not the event itself or what happens in that event. It's what happens inside of a person as a result of what happened in that event, which I find is like I still find it really fascinating. And that was the link. That was the link. So I use a lot of my own personal stories because it helps people to relate to the fact that even from something small as being humiliated in a class, in a school class, kids are kids can be cruel. um,
Mm.
it can happen to any single one of us, right up until the big events of. So yeah, it can be anything. Trauma is just what happens inside of you as a person in that moment, as to how the body holds that reaction, holds that tension, holds that fear, all those emotions, anger, fear, frustration. We're holding on to it a lot of the time if we're not processing it in a way.
Mm. Hmm. So your fibro experience, and I'm sure you're not alone here, sounds like it's all these emotional hurts that you store in your body and you build up and build up and build up, but then they present themselves as physical discomfort, physical pain, physical exhaustion, potentially because you haven't processed that emotion in the time. It's almost like you just keep filling up that cup until there's no more room in that cup and it has to spill over and present itself in your body. Is that what it's like?
Exactly that, yeah. And it's the layer on layer on layer. So a lot of it in these fibro support groups that are on like Facebook and things like that, people will often say, as fibromyalgia is not known as an illness that gets progressively worse, but has anybody recognized that it's got progressively worse? And a lot of people are saying, yeah, it's got progressively worse in me. But the only reason it's got progressively worse is because things that happened when we were a child we haven't dealt with. So we push through, and those layers keep building layer on layer. So when we do the trauma healing, when we do the that reframe, it's like peeling back those onions layer on layer on layer, so that we get to the bottom of where it all started.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. And I imagine that not everybody is, I imagine that there's a lot of people out there living it with pain, with chronic fatigue, because they're similar, right? But they're not either they're not aware or they're not ready to even explore the notion that these are held traumatic experiences, because they're not there yet, right? So at what point do you become that person where, because there's a sense of self-responsibility that has to take place for you to even be prepared to be like, you know what, this is something that I'm holding on to. They're things that actually not necessarily even happened to you, but you were a part of that, seeing those things happen with your dad and being in the household with your parents. They're not, of course, they're your experiences because you were there, but they weren't your fault or anything, right? But you hold on to all of those emotions. I bet there's a lot of people out there that aren't even ready to go there yet, right?
Yeah. And that not being aware is the piece that suddenly clicks with people sometimes. And once it's clicked, it's like, wow, I need to deal with this
Mm.
and I need to get some help with this a lot of the time. Some people, are able to work through these things themselves. Other people need guidance and support to get there. But a life without pain is certainly possible.
Mm.
It's certainly
Mm.
possible because I've been through it. It hasn't been easy, but yeah, it's possible.
So what was it? Is it that, so everything for you, everything came to a head, like, say it was around COVID time. I think we've all lost that time scale. We've probably all got PTSD from that time. But but for you, everything came to this crescendo around about that time for you to actually go and be like, right, I need to actually find somebody to give me a diagnosis because I'm ready to deal with this. I can't stand it any longer. I forget what my question was going to be, but it was somewhere along the lines of like, who are you as a person in that moment? Because I imagine that's a huge amount of vulnerability, huh? To be ready to be at that moment. But what does that feel like when you're there at that tip of, I'm ready to deal with this, and and I need something, and then somebody gives you a diagnosis?
It was a point of desperation. But as I say, the label in itself, the term, gave me validation. It allowed me to know that it's not all in my head. And at the age of 33 as well, I had a young child. I'd had my third sort of mental breakdown to the point where she was a poorly baby. So she was in and out of hospital all the time. And I remember going to my husband one day and I'm like, I can't deal with this anymore. Like literally, I would place my hands on my head and be like, I just can't do this anymore because you're physically feeling all of that emotional drain, but outwardly, it's not looking even half as bad as it is inside. I was at the point of desperation and I just decided that I can't live my life like this anymore. So when I received my diagnosis, the doctor prescribed me 10 sessions of psychotherapy on the NHS. Now 10 sessions is, so obviously in the UK we have the NHS and the National Health System. Um, so that was free, 10 sessions. 10 sessions was just not enough. It opened the doorways to the things that I needed to address, but it was uncovering them, but it wasn't dealing with them. It wasn't sitting with them. It wasn't being with that hurt. It was just sort of opening them up, and then I was just sort of left to figure it out on my own. And that's exactly what I did, and that's why I invested so much heavily into my own research and how I could combat not only the symptoms, but how I was going to deal with this long term.
Mm. And when you were looking for, when you had gotten to the point where you're like, I need this to get sorted out, was it easy to find the right person to give you a diagnosis? Were you taken seriously by healthcare professionals, or how much recognition is there in fibro?
I think it's really difficult because, again, you can feel it and you can just try and describe it to somebody, but they can't actually make that connection a lot of the time. It was hard. And I remember saying to my mum, in fact, I meant to bring it to me as well, but I remember saying to my mum at the time and describing to my mum how I was feeling and what was going on. And she said, do yourself a silhouette. So like I printed myself off a silhouette online, and I pinpoint on this silhouette exactly where I was feeling pain, how often I was feeling the pain, and what it felt like. And when you've got the visual in front of you, it was like, wow, like how do I deal with this? How do I live with this day in, day out? It was it just, I was like, how can anybody live with this? And that's exactly what I do with people now, is like at the beginning of somebody's journey, is get them to identify exactly where they're feeling pain in their body, how often, and we rate it on a score of 0 to 10, because only when you're through the other side of that process do you actually appreciate how far you've actually come, and how
Mm.
much. Nobody should live like that. Nobody should live like that.
Hmm.
But it's hard to get the recognition.
Sure. Yeah, I bet. And so, say it's 5 years in from your diagnosis, around about. What does life look like for you now? Hey friend, thanks so much for listening. Did you know that you can now find us on YouTube at youtube.com/The Pilates Professional? Now, if this episode resonates with you, please share it with someone else who would benefit from hearing it. Back to the show.
Drastically different. So I see pain in a completely different way. Pain actually excites me, which is which is a kind of a sadistic thing to say, isn't it, really? But I can see pain in a completely different way, and that's because I have a massive understanding of where each individual pain it came from. So I'll just give you a little bit of a breakdown almost. I have completely changed the relationship I have with myself. The mental chatter that goes up on in my head, first and foremost. Self-love is the term that I coin. Is, there's nothing better than self-love, and applying that care, attention, and focus to yourself on a day-to-day basis, on a moment by moment basis. I complete My relationship with my husband has completely changed. My relationship with my kids has completely changed. I see myself in a completely different light. I am capable, I am worthy, I am enough, and my best is always good enough. Now, these were things that I didn't always believe. These are massively changed, because going back to those spaces, you can see the beliefs and the behaviors that then impacted your life, because they were created in moments of fear. They were created in moments of self-suppression. Those layers, it's just like once you peel back those layers, you begin to change your beliefs, and things like that. So I don't live in daily pain. If I do still get localized pain, and I'll give you an example which is quite funny. I do still get localized pain, and when I get localized pain, I know that it's always telling me a story. Pain is always telling you a story. It's there as a protection mechanism, because it's trying to prevent you from being in a space or doing something that it knows is not as good for you. And I love the way that you go into this on your podcast, because if I'm honest, the science side of things bores me, but the links, I can completely relate to a lot of what you say from, like just having experienced it. But your brain is always scanning for danger. So the moment that it can implement that pain to protect you from actually doing something, it will do, and it will speak louder if you don't listen. So I'll give you the example. So recently, even knowing the amount of, pain journey and experience that I've been on, I went through a period recently where I was sat at my kitchen table, and it started as a little niggle in my shoulder, and that niggle I probably ignored for like a few days, and the pain got worse and it got worse, to the point where you're talking a week in, and my whole shoulder had completely frozen on the left side, and it was so painful. Like, pain from me, like, sort of ramps from a 0, and then once it's speaking, it's like a 10 straight away. So my whole shoulder was frozen on the left side, and it got to the point where I ended up in A&E again, accident and emergency. And because I've got fibro on my medical notes, they instantly put you in an alternate room to the rest of the patients that are waiting. You don't get seen any quicker, but but they put you in another room. And it was only then had I realised why that pain was speaking so loudly. I mean, this pain had gotten to the point where I asked my husband to rub like deep heat into it to try and ease some of the pain from it. And he was rubbing it in, and I'm going, stop hurting me like that. Stop rubbing, stop being so rough. And he's like, Reanne, literally, this is how I'm touching you. So he showed me on my right shoulder how gently he was rubbing it in. And I couldn't believe the difference. Like, it was like that pain, it was speaking volumes. And when they put me in this other room, I'd been in there just a few hours, and in there they'd got like the telly on, and the telly had got like this classical music playing. And I realized that the reason why it had gotten so loud is because at the time, when you look at the time frame and the period that I was going through, I'd fixated, and this is like a downfall of mine sometimes, but I'd fixated on a project that I was doing to do with my work, and I'd fixated on it, and all my self-care practices had gone out the window. I wasn't meditating, I wasn't reading, I'd stopped going to the gym. All of those things had gone by the wayside. So I was neglecting myself through fixation on this project. And my shoulder it began as a niggle, because it was like, right, go back to doing those things now, or I'm going to speak louder. And that's exactly what it did. And the minute I spent a few hours in that hospital, and I did have naproxen, which is a nerve suppressant. So I did have naproxen, but when I came home, obviously, I know medication long term, it's there as a temporary fix. So the pain had gone instantly. But the minute I understood why it was giving me that pain, I started applying those self-care practices again. The pain had no reason to stick around. It had completely gone. I needed the medication to take the edge off, but then, I fathomed out the reason longer term. So it still catches me out now and then. And, when I'm putting myself out there to do something that I'm not necessarily happy with, I'll get like a pain flare in my hand or something, as a reminder that you need to stop doing things just because other people want. So I still fall into those traps. You need to stop doing the things that people need you to do just because they need you to do them. What's I always I spend a lot of time now in encouraging people to listen to their heart. What's your heart telling you to do? Are you happy with that? Is that going to benefit you in any way? Which way? So yeah, it's life has massively changed, massively, but I
Mm.
still fall into those traps occasionally.
Yeah, sure. And I think like working with people, whether it's something like this or, even if it's an injury, and then, oh, my back hurts again. We fall into those old patterns. But similar to what you're saying, we say in the studio, your body will whisper to you, but if you don't listen to your whispers, eventually your body will start yelling at you. So it sounds quite similar, hey? That you're having to be really
Exactly.
intentional of listening to what you need emotionally and probably physically, and always nurturing that. I mean, I think the body is actually very intelligent, but we can be, quite stupid sometimes, that we just ignore things, over and over again. So tell me, golly gosh, I can't imagine how it must have affected your friendships and your work and your relationships over the years. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that, like how things had been affected, and then what is the healing process for other people, even around you, like the people around you in your life?
Yeah, so the beliefs and behaviors that are created, in childhood times, Particularly around the event of my dad, there was some massive beliefs and behaviours that was created around them, because at the time my mum was working away a lot, and I've done loads of forgiveness and practices to just see how resonate with how he was feeling in that time and space as well. But at the time, my mum was working away a lot, and I was expected by my dad to, I do things like, I was only a teenager, but making my brother's dinner, cleaning around the house, and I was expected to do all these things. And as you can imagine, a stroppy teenager, it's like, just, like, why am I all of a sudden responsible for doing these things? I would rebel, and so those, and we would come at loggerheads. We would, emotions would flare, tempers would flare. So there was a lot in that. And the beliefs and the behaviors that were created when he attempted suicide was that I always need to put everyone else above myself, because if I don't, then bad things might happen. And so
Mm.
when you think about that belief in itself, when I became a mum, when I became a wife, I was constantly over giving, over pleasing, and it served me well. I built a business from it, in childcare. I was looking after other people's children, and that belief in itself, built me quite a successful business. So it's because I was constantly over giving and constantly over pleasing, people, are receptive. They're receptive of that, and they appreciate you based on what you do for them. But it was always at the detriment to myself. And so when I started to change those beliefs and those patterning, it put me and my husband into, this massive turning point, because he was married to a completely different person. I had so much more respect for myself. I always put myself first. If something doesn't sit right with me, then it's just not going to happen. Um, so yeah, we went through marriage counselling as well, because it was like he was living with a completely different person.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. Hey, I mean, yeah, I bet. Kudos to you both, for sticking it through, because I'm sure that this would break down a lot of relationships. Hey, as you start to realize who you need to be well, it doesn't necessarily suit everybody around you, does it?
It doesn't come easy at all. And I think it's definitely the way I was as opposed to how I am now has definitely impacted my eldest son as well. And I see some of his struggles that he has now has been impacted by the way that I was. And the way that I am now is he struggles to come to terms with the fact that I've made some massive changes, and I won't stand for certain things now. And so yeah, it's like he's living with a complete different person. So everyone around me has sort of had to roll with the changes. So yeah, it has been difficult on all parts,
Mm.
but I'm well. So it's
Mm.
the you have, and the enlightening thing is as well is it allows people to grow as people, because if you're constantly over giving, over pleasing, over like doing everything for everybody else all the time, you're not letting them do what they need to do to grow as people. So and the minute you step back, they can step into their own. So it's been massive, and it's a process and it's a journey, but it's well worth it. And in all times of that journey, think about yourself, because without you, there is nothing.
Mm. It's fascinating. So, what does being well look like for you, Rianne? Like, what are some daily practices that you make sure that you do to keep well, like physically, emotionally? What are things that you take part in?
So, meditation is massive, massive for me. I regularly meditate. I probably don't meditate as much as I should do. Probably about 3 or 4 times a week. Creating space for myself. I'm very reflective. I like to do a lot of journaling practices, creative writing. I spend a lot of time grounding in nature. So, with that, being up early to see the sunrise, often just sitting and watching, the sun go down. It's like this time of year is perfect in the UK. I just went for a little walk. I checked myself into a hotel actually a couple of days ago because I needed to get some work done, and so I didn't needed that time and space. And I went for a little walk down a country park while I was there. And I get so much joy now out of just being with nature and just watching the sunset and just having that stillness, that quiet, that peace, that headspace. And I think a lot of these things, like healing frequencies as well, just spending time just listening to healing to healing frequencies and sound. And I do a lot of connecting with my breath, hence why I became a breathwork practitioner, is because your breath is so powerful, so important. So all of these, your breath is at the forefront of them. It's the thing that we have when we first greet the world, and it'll be the thing that we have until the day that we pass out. So it's really important, and being grateful, just grateful to be alive. And gratitude, I often practice gratitude every morning at least, and throughout the day, and just having that zest for life and that appreciation of life itself. Yeah, it's paramount. And repeating those affirmations to yourself, when you don't. I have lots of like little quotes and things around my home, and you'd come in and you think, why is there so many like things, like so many quotes and affirmations and things around? But it's important, and I want my children to understand that these things are important as well. Particularly my daughter, she's 9 years old, and she really feeds into this, and I can really see. Oh gosh, I'm getting feeling emotional talking about her now, but she is my star seed. She's everything that I see in that I what could have been as a child before life happened. And she is so kind and so thoughtful of other people, and I want to just protect that vulnerability for as long as I can, while still building that resilience. And I see these self-love practices as well in like creating this applying this self-love to myself, so that she learns from it, and she can see that you always put yourself first. It's important, and it will be the most important thing that you could ever do.
Wow. I wonder, is there a part of you that ever considers that had you not gone through all of that trauma, all those years of not fitting in, all of those years of feeling like you're standing on the outside looking in, the pain, all of that, that you wouldn't have gotten to where you are now, which is a pretty bloody awesome place.
That's a massive gratitude that I have. Yeah, it is. Looking back, and when you can sit and talk to somebody and tell them all the things that you've gone through, and people that I work with now as well, like my story is nothing compared to some people that I've worked with before. And what we always come back to is the fact that what happened shaped you as a person. And no matter what time and space that you're in, everything is happening for a reason, and it's building you to that. It's just taking you to that next step of where you need to go on your path. And I honestly believe that without everything that's happened, I'm so grateful for everything that's happened, because it's built and it's shaped what I do now, what I find passion in. And I wholly believe that it was my life's purpose. Everything that happened for a reason, and I'm really grateful for everything that did happen.
Mm, hmm. Yeah, wow. It really sounds like you've done like such an amazing job of taking, something that, I mean, we work a lot with, with CFS and fibro, and it can be such a traumatic, the whole experience is so traumatic when you're in it. I can't imagine what you must commit to work your way through to a point where you can feel gratitude for it and be vulnerable enough, but also have the strength to share that with other people. That's a very precious place for you to be, huh? So tell me, as we wrap this up, this I just need to tell you, this is going to be so helpful for so many people of our listeners, and I've no doubt that you doing the work that you do and sharing your story and being all of those things is going to help a lot of people in very bad situations pull through. So tell us, what is it that you're doing at the moment? Because you work with other people, you've said it a few times, you work with other people that are on their journey to self-healing. What is it that you are doing right now with people? And yeah, let's share that first, and I've got one other question for you.
So the title I coined myself with is breathwork and physical pain coach. So I've already mentioned, just how important the breath is in all of these processes. And the kind of breathwork that I do is very deep. It's very somatic. So you're looking to simulate the vagus nerve. So that's actually the episode that I watched, that I listened to you do. Um, and what it does, it simulates the vagus nerve in so that it acts as a whole body reset. And in that, I tailor my questions, my coaching, around you're altering the state. So you're altering your state of consciousness. And I am coaching you through that whole process. So we look at each individual pain. And we journey into the story of that pain, how that pain was, when did it start? What emotions does it have? What feelings does it have? What story does it have behind that? And then we journey through to how actually you want life to look like now. And in taking clients on that process, it's, I can't think of one word for it, phenomenal. It really is. Like, it is massively transformational in seeing those pains, just journeying through that whole process. And on the other side of it, you change those you can change, people are able to change those beliefs, those behaviors, those patterns based on the knowledge and the awareness that they get from being in that process. So that's really what I focus my one-to-one on, my containers on, at the moment. So that is like sort of the core of what I do. I'm also creating digital products for people to be able to begin their own journey. So a lot of them is getting to come to terms with the fact that people need to pay attention to the central nervous system, ways in which they can do that themselves. Obviously things like yoga and Pilates and things like that is a way. Like movement, it getting the body moving and shifting that energy is one way that they can do that as well. So yeah, it's really a case of applying tips and giving out knowledge to the ways that people can manage their symptoms. What I tend to do on a one-to-one basis is we look at how are we going to get rid of this, how are we going to alleviate this longer term, how are we going to manage this on a level that's going to last. How do we stop going from those peaks and those troughs of feeling great and then like crashing the next moment. It's about changing lives, just dramatically helping people to just change life as they're experiencing in that moment.
That's cool. So we'll definitely put on the show notes, your website, how to get in contact with you, and all of that. I think that you're going to have some people definitely reach out to you and start to follow you, because I think that you've got an amazing story and you're doing some really cool work. Just before we go, I like to ask this question to most people. If you could go back and speak to yourself back then when you were really suffering, when everything started to fall to pieces, being the person that you are today and the person that you continue to become, what would you say to that little girl?
I would say, I love you. You are strong, you're capable. Keep ploughing on because your voice needs to be heard. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Reanne. I really appreciate your time. 3:30 in the morning in the UK, you crazy lady.
I feel alive now. I feel completely like I was planning on going back to bed for an hour, but I actually feel like, yeah, I feel great.
It's such a powerful story for you to be sharing, Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I do really feel like it's an important message to share with people because they can change. We using your brain is, and again, I think you've done an episode on this as well. Like your brain's capacity to change is phenomenal. Like, and we are incredible as humans if we think about it. It's just tapping into that potential, and that's exactly the space that I come from. It's just empowering people to know that they are at the forefront of change, and whatever they want to change in their life, they are the one. It is all about you. It's all about you, which is kind of ironic because growing up, my mum used to always say, it's not all about you, Reanne. But it is actually. So yeah, we laugh and joke about that now. But yeah, it's all about you. All about you.
That's awesome. Thank you again, Reanne. Like I said, folks, we're going to leave Reanne some details in the show notes. I know that everybody is going to get so much out of this. And wishing you all the best, Reanne. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap, my friend. Now, before you go, make sure you check out the show notes. That's exactly where you'll find anything we're offering alongside this very episode and the link to subscribe to the Pilates Muse newsletter. Our subscribers receive free handouts and resources connected to the topics we explore right here. They're specifically created for Pilates professionals, movement educators, and Pilates lovers just like you. So, until the next episode,